Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be ranking every single NHL team's 2022 NHL Draft. Now, a lot of craziness happened over these last few days and a lot of surprising and really interesting picks that we had to dissect. But going through every single NHL team, what are the teams that came out on top? What are the teams that came out the best? And how did your team do in the 2022 Entry Draft? Watch till the end for all of the picks and all the prospect analysis. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of you guys aren't subscribed, so if you like draft content, this channel is the place to be. Now, yes, I am sunburned, but we're making the video, dang it, and we're going to start off with the worst team in the 2022 draft, and we obviously went through these teams in the winners and losers video from yesterday, so check that out if you haven't. But in my opinion, the team that got the worst off in the draft was the San Jose Sharks, both for the trade they made as well as the picks they actually made as well. When it comes to the picks, they got Philip Bystedt in the first round, which in my opinion is a pretty low ceiling guy, but at the same time will be an NHL player, so it's not the biggest problem in the world. Also, Cameron Lund, who's a lot of the same way, a little bit slippery though, and a little bit lankier. Then you got Mattias Havelin, which in my opinion was the best value the Sharks got in the draft. But besides that, Michael Fisher is a huge bet, and I'm not sure how much predictability there is. And the rest of the draft for them was kind of weak. And considering the trade they made where they had the 11th overall pick, end up trading that away to the Coyotes, with the options they had in players like Jonathan Lekkerimaki, in players like Frank Nazar, to me, this Sharks draft could have been solid. Instead, it's rather disappointing. But now let's move on to the 31st spot and go on to the next team here in the Florida Panthers. Now, to me, with the Florida Panthers, their draft was just rather below average. You got guys that are really big bets like Sandis Vilmanis, for instance. But overall in the draft, these are just a lot of potential guys. I mean, Marek Alsher in the third round is a little bit rich for me, and it feels like they went for a lot of guys that are just these big bets, which I can respect. But at the same time, to me, the best pick was Jack Devine, who in the 7th round is a steal for me, but in my opinion, that selection could not really hold the rest of the draft up for them. Then going on to number 30, next up, I have the Arizona Coyotes. Now, here's the thing. I think some of the selections were solid. Logan Cooley at 3 is fantastic, and there is potential with Conor, Geekie, and Julian Lutz specifically at 43, I think is a solid pick as well. But besides that, I'm really not a big fan of Maverick Lamouroux at 29, and even though I think Conor Geekie has potential, 11 is still about 7 to 8 spots way earlier than where I would have had him, and unless he's able to fix that pace, unless he's able to fix that stride, to me there is some problems there. I'm not sure if the Coyotes are the greatest team to be able to fix that. You also got Artem Duda, which I'm not the biggest fan of, 36th overall, really raw, and to me there's just not a lot of projectability. Besides that, nothing that I really love, but I do think the Julian Lutz pick and the Logan Cooley picks are great, and that's really what keeps this draft up for me. But again, considering what the Coyotes could have had, it's just rather meh. But let's go on to the next team here at 29 and go on to the St. Louis Blues. Another team that I think just had a pretty meh draft. You got Jimmy Snuggerud. Kaskamaki has some potential, but Butchinger as number 88. They left quite a bit of talent on the table. Even though I do like Jimmy Snuggerud, I just feel like his ceiling is just this really solid, great third-line defensive forward. And to me, the rest of the draft is just kind of below average. But the Blues do go for some guys that I think could be NHL players, but I think Snuggerud might be the only player on that list that does play sizable and meaningful NHL games. Now going on to number 20 or 28 next up, I'm going to go here next with the Edmonton Oilers. This was a team that in my opinion didn't have many selections. They obviously only had 4, and they didn't have a second, third, or 4th round pick. Reed Schaefer at 32 is meh for me. There was some good shooting upside. I do like some of the plays he's able to make, but he is great physically, and there is some big confidence when it comes to his game on both offense and with that physical play. I think he'll be a solid, just like Jimmy Snuggerud, third-line player, but I'm not sure how much upside there is there. And then you pick a goalie in Janssen in the 5th round, Yaitsev in the 6th, and then Mata in the 7th. Just a pretty meh draft, in my opinion, for the Oilers. But going on to number 27, this is the first team that didn't have many selections, but also I wasn't really in love with their selections either. Tapi Rani is a really funny one. I mean, he's really physical, uses his size well, especially when it comes to the neutral zone and in forechecking situations, but I don't think there's a lot of projectable skill there. His skating stride is rather rough. You also got Parker Bell and Cade Littler. Not much to say about the Flames draft. Next up at number 26, let's go on to the Colorado Avalanche. Only 2 picks in the draft, but you know what? They picked Christopher Romain, just with Cale Makar, that'll be the best defensive pairing of all time. But seriously, I mean, there's worse picks they could have made at those spots, but I didn't really know where else to put them since they had no picks, so they'll go into the 26th spot. Now on to the 25th spot, though, and the Pittsburgh Penguins. This is going to be an interesting one for me. Now, their draft was rather inconsistent. Owen Pickering at 21, I think is a pretty fine pick considering the situation. And I think at that size, he brings, again, a little bit more of a shorter offensive game. To me, he's a guy that loves to play in transition, loves to get pucks up the ice. But I do think he needs to use his physical play a lot more and use that defensive ability and that long range that he does have way more consistently. I just didn't see it too much in the WHL this last year. Zam Plante, I think, is also an interesting pick at 150. But besides that, I think the draft was just rather below average for them. Next up in the 24th spot, I'm going to go with the Ottawa Senators here. Now, I will say this, I do like the Thomas Hamara pick at number 87. I think that could turn out really interesting. I could see him being a bottom pair guy that's just smart, consistent, and efficient. Besides that, I mean, Philip Norberg is a big defenseman who skates rather decently, but not much else besides that, in my opinion, at 64. Oscar Pettersson is a big wild card. I could see Jorian Donovan being interesting, but again, besides that, not really much to write home about for the Sens, but considering the Alex DeBrincat trade, I think it was just fine for them. Now going on to the 23 spot, and also I do have to say that I'm not factoring in the trades for these rankings. If I was, the Sens would be much higher. I'm just looking at the draft picks, so keep that in mind. Next up, I'm going to go to 23, and I'm going to go with the Vegas Golden Knights with this selection, going right to them. To me, there is a lot of potential with this draft, but also a lot of chance that this just becomes nothing. For one, I do like Jordan Gustafsson quite a bit. He just has a lot of solid talents, and he's able to really execute in systems well. He's a guy that I think has a pretty good shot to him and a pretty good physical game. I do think in the third round, 79th overall, that's a great pick. And Sapovaliv is an interesting one. I think he was great in transition in the OHL this last year, but he's also a guy that I think needs to take that next step before he's a solid NHL contributor, but there is potential there. Next up at 22, we're going to go to a team that, in my opinion, had one great pick, and then the rest was kind of just sluggish, personally, and that is the Los Angeles Kings. Now, I will say this, actually, Otto Silin in the 5th round is solid, but really the biggest one for me is Jack Hughes at 51st overall, a pretty high second rounder in my rankings. Getting him at number 51 is fantastic, just going to be this consistent, great, and just solid leader in the center position, and as a third line, just guy you can depend upon as a centerman. To me, there's a lot to like there. He's not going to blow you away, but he does all the right things, makes the right decisions, and at 51st overall, I think that's a fantastic pick to make. But besides that, I think the Kings draft was just kind of okay. Now going on to the 21 spot, the Boston Bruins actually come into this selection. Now here's the thing, I think two picks here are ones that I'm really going to be interested to watch, and those are the first two picks in Matthew Portre and Cole Spicer. Cole Spicer I do like a lot at 117. He's this really just unrefined prospect, but I do like his creativity. And this last year, I thought he was pretty underrated in the USDP. Portre is interesting. I do like his defensive game a lot, but I also think, even though he's pretty efficient, there's a lot more that needs to be added in terms of his high-end skill. We'll see how he ends up progressing, but another guy that I could see being a bottom 6 centerman or forward for the Bruins. Next up, going to number 20, and the New York Rangers. This was another team that I just was really interested in. Where are the Rangers? Here they are. Now, the thing is, I love their first two picks. Adam Sekura at 63 is absolutely amazing. With how just refined he is, with how consistent he is defensively, this is a guy that with his positioning and his raw work ethic is just able to make the game so easy for his line mates, and especially on transition, I think there's a lot of potential there. And you also got Bryce McDowell-Barker, who has some really solid upside. There could be also a good overall game there, but I also think there is a lot that needs to be added to his consistency, but we'll see how he progresses next year as well. Besides that, I think it was just an okay draft for the Rangers, but I do think Sakura and McConnell-Barker could be the highlights coming out of it. Next up at number 19, I'm going to end up going to the Philadelphia Flyers here. Now, here's the thing. Would Cutter Gauthier have been my pick at number 5? Absolutely not. I have him outside my top 10, but Cutter Gauthier is going to be an amazing Flyer. Like, if the Flyers are looking for players that are in the realm of what they've had in the past, Conor is a fantastic addition. Just brings so much physically, so much in terms of his vision and on transitions. And this is a guy that I think has a lot of solid upside as a goal-scoring, physical player. I'm not sure if he's going to be this fantastic first-line offensive player, but I do see him becoming maybe this second-line or physical player who can play in all situations. Would I have drafted him that high? No, but I can see where the Flyers are coming from. And also at 69, I love the Devin Kaplan pick. Now, obviously, it's pretty nice, but for me, Kaplan was a top 40 prospect in this draft and brings a lot of the same things, actually, as Cutter Gauthier. And to me, with Devin Kaplan, I like it a lot for a stylistic fit, brings great size, but uses it a lot in offensive transitions in the neutral zone. He can be an absolute beast at times, and it's always just it feels like a snap of the finger, and he can be this dynamic, physical player. Sometimes I do see him not really using it as much as he should, but at the same time, I think this is a guy that brings great shot upside, really good selection, is pretty smart with the puck, and in my opinion, as an offensive power forward, Kaplan can bring a lot. Besides that, nothing I love. Alex Bump is fine in 133, but just like the Rangers, those first two picks are going to look great for them. But next up, let's go on to the 18th ranked team in the 2022 draft, and next up, I'm going to go with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, the Leafs had a weird draft in my opinion. You obviously had the first pick there, or I guess you had the trade in the first round to start things off, where they traded back, got the 38th overall pick in a deal involving Peter Mrazek, and we heard reports from different reporters that apparently the Leafs thought that at 38, the player they could get was a top 15 player in their draft rankings, and they eventually selected Fraser Minton. Now, I'll say this. Having Fraser Minton in the top 15 is bold. I can see why he's a second-round pick, but to me, it's way too high for a guy that just has such a low ceiling, in my opinion. But we'll see what he does next year for Kamloops. He was a guy that rose quite a bit for a lot of people. At 38, we'll see what the Leafs do with that, but it'll be interesting to see how that one progresses. Next up in the third round, we got Nicholas Moldenhauer, which, in my opinion, was a fantastic selection at 95. Really solid on transitions in the offensive zone. Loves to make plays, loves to make simple passes, but he's a guy that I think really brings a solid, consistent game. At 95, that's another player I'm really interested to see once he fits into the Leafs development system, how they're able to use that soft skill, how they're able to use that timing, and to me at 95, that's a great pick. You also got a couple other picks. I mean, Nikita Grebionkin will be interesting to see as well, but again, another couple of first picks that I just absolutely love. Now going on to the Tampa Bay Lightning at number 17, my next pick here. The Lightning were in an interesting position with this draft because they had that first round pick, and we had some rumors that they could potentially be trading that, but they ended up sticking with it and selecting Isaac Howard 31st overall, which I think is a pretty solid spot to get him at. Not the exact position, a little bit earlier than mine, maybe by a couple of spots, but you're really just putting hairs out there at that point. With Isaac Howard at 31, though, I think in the Lightning system, they can capture so much of that offensive edge, that creativity, that ability to get pucks and be able to create plays along the boards. To me, he's a pretty solid Lightning fit, and I think the sky is the limit. Now, on defense, there's a lot of issues, but going to Tampa Bay system, I could see them refining him and really making him into something special, so we'll see what happens at 31. They also got Lucas Edmonds, who, of course, was one of the more high-profile overagers in this draft, had an amazing season in the OHL, and to me at 86, that's another pick that I'm really interested to see what this next year brings, because he'll probably be out of the OHL, he might be in the AHL at that point, and I'm really interested to see how the Syracuse Crunch develop him. He was a guy that's been exploding over these past couple of years, has really shown bigger strides in his pace, in his explosiveness, and to me with Tampa, if they're able to keep that progression going, you could have a player there that fits into a third line, maybe power play someday, but we'll see what happens there. Also, another pick I think was interesting was Connor Kurth, 192 overall, but I do like Isaac Howard a lot at 31st, a lot of potential, and Lucas Edmonds could also bring something special too. Now going on to the 16th place in the NHL draft, let's go on to the next team here that in my opinion was a little bit weird, in the Detroit Red Wings. Now, here's the thing. I am not one to doubt Steve Yzerman, and I will not doubt Steve Yzerman in this video. I have him right in the middle, because even though for almost every single pick in this draft, he drafted players earlier than where I would have had him, At the same time, I can still see where they're coming from, and I still like a lot of these different players. Marco Kasper, 8th, even though I have him around the 15 range, I could definitely see why they just select him. They have a little bit less depth at center, and to me, Kasper brings a lot of intensity, that great motor, that great work ethic, great positioning as well around the net. He's a guy that can tip pucks in, can make things happen around the net, and get into soft positions and be able to work things out. I'm not sure how much potential there is. I'm not sure if he's going to be this amazing second-line center, but I could see him at least becoming an NHL player with that drive that he has. You also got Dylan James at 40, which is another interesting pick. Dmitry Bolchelnikov at number 54 is going to be another fascinating one. He's an overager, but to me has a lot of rawness to him. He has some potential. I like that shooting ability, but also he really needs to bulk up, and I think potentially come to North America pretty soon because he's a guy that I think needs that development over in the AHL potentially. Anton Johansson, who is another big overager, a guy that I liked back in the 2020 draft, I believe. Now, at 105th, I don't know how early I'd select him there, but at the same time, he's a guy that coming into the Red Wing system could do something more. And besides that, a lot of guys that I think are solid worth of draft picks, but maybe a bit higher than expected. But hey, if there's anybody to turn them into great players, it is the Detroit Red Wings, and it is Steve Yzerman. Now going on to number 15. Next up, I'm going to go to the Anaheim Ducks. Now, their draft was topsy-turvy. You go from Pavel Mintyukov, which I think is a very solid, great offensive defenseman chip to add to a roster, add to the future. Then you go for Nathan Gaucher at 22. I think it's a pretty bad pick considering what was available. I think he will be an NHL player, but I'm just not sure how much he pushes the lineup. You also got Noah Warren at 42, which I think is another lower ceiling guy, but as a bottom pairing, solid skating, bigger defenseman, I can see where they're coming from there, and I think he'll be consistent for them. At 53, you got Tristan Luneau, who, again, I don't think has the biggest potential. I think his skill is a little bit low, but at the same time, makes a lot of the right decisions, is decent defensively, and I think it can be a just solid, maybe 5th defenseman at the NHL level. You also got Benjamin King, 107th overall, which was a pretty surprising pick to me. Besides that, a lot of rawness, but at the same time, I do still like some of the moves made here by the Ducks. You got a big upside pick in Mintyukov, and at the same time, I could totally see Gaucher, Warren, and Luneau being NHL pieces. Next up at number 14, let's go on to the Columbus Blue Jackets next up, and to me, even though there was just a little bit of missed potential, at the same time, the players they got away with in this draft, I think were pretty great. David Jiricek at number 6, exactly where I had him on my rankings, and I think he's going to be a perfect fit with the Blue Jackets, which raises that stock for me. Denton Mateychuk is a really big bet at number 12. I have some problems with his potential NHL future. I think he's a big boomer bust guy, because I think in terms of some of the things that he's doing, some of the plays he's making, some of the high risk chances he's taking won't translate to the NHL level, but I do think he can make great plays. He can show amazing skill, but I also think there is some pace that needs to be raised once he gets to the pros. Same thing kind of with Luca Del Belbaluz. I think there's potential there, but there's also a lot that I think ruins his projectability onto the NHL level, but that's another guy that if he booms, that speed and that skill and that pace to his game will really show through. Jordan Nemec at number 96 is another interesting one for the Blue Jackets specifically. Domé is one of the most interesting ones out there, one of the best scorers in the QMJHL this last year, but in my opinion, with the size that he brings, he's not an amazing skater, he's not an amazing play pusher, and to me, there is going to be some really big refinement that needs to be made once he reaches the pros, because again, he's the type of player that in the QMJHL this year got away with a lot that I just don't feel, especially against some of the goalies that he was facing, I just don't feel is going to translate onto that next level, but we'll see. If they can work with that talent, there could be something there. And besides that, I think the Blue Jackets draft was pretty solid. Overall, not many decisions that I think were bad, maybe a little bit of reaches, but at the same time, the players they did get have potential, and if they boom, this Blue Jackets draft could be really, really great. Now going on to the 13th spot, I'm going to go to a team that I think had a pretty underrated draft in the Nashville Predators. Now, obviously to me, the top 2 picks are the ones that make the most difference. Joakim Kemell at 17 17. Even though I guess I'm lower on him than most people, I had him around 11th in my draft rankings. He ended up slipping quite a bit in this draft, which was a surprise to most, including me, and they get him at number 17, which even though I'm lower on him, I still think that's great value. And if you're able to use that physicality with his goal scoring, if you're able to use that shot selection well, to me, I think Kemell could be a very solid middle six power play forward. You also got Adam Ingram in the 82nd spot, which I think is fantastic. Loved watching him in the USHL this year. Solid pace to him, pretty refined in the defensive zone. And I think there's a solid bet as a third liner potentially someday. I also do like Cole O'Hara at the 114 spot. Graham Sword could be something at 146. So overall, considering what the Preds got in a Kemell pick that was pretty late for where he should have gone, and Ingram, who I think should have been a second round pick, not a bad draft whatsoever. But now let's go on to my favorite team in the Dallas Stars and their draft at number 12. And to me, the Stars draft can just be summarized by good. Like, to me, almost every single pick was solid value. Liam Bichelle, one of my favorite prospects in the draft, and a lot of people will just assume it's a reach. To me, I don't think it's much of a reach. At number 18, at 6'5", he skates extremely well for the size that he provides. And physically, in terms of his stature, he uses his physicality in all the right ways. He won't make open ice hits for the sake of making open ice hits. He'll make them when he needs to. He'll be fierce when he needs to, but he also brings a solid edge to his game and is a smart player as well. Christian Kyrou at 50, I think, is great as well. One of the best play pushers in the entire OHL defensively this last year. I've brought some great results, and to me was just such a good playmaker, such a great solid player around the blue line. And if he has a power play defensive player, he could be a really interesting bet in the future. George Vagaros is going to be an interesting project. You also got Gavin White, who is an overager, I believe, this last year for Flint. Really interesting pick, and he could be a guy that once he gets to the Texas Stars could take a big step. And you also got Matthew Semenov in the 6th round, 179th overall. To me, it's a pretty solid steal. I had him just in my top 50, and to me, the only problem is that skating. If you're able to improve that stride a little bit, if you're able to improve that edge work, to me, this is a player that brings so many great results outside of that, is great with his vision, great with his passing game, and to me, with Semenov, if you're able to fix that skating, he could be a really solid NHLer someday. So overall, I just love the Stars draft. I think they did a really good job with pretty much every single pick. Now going on to the 11th spot, next up, I'm going to go with the Washington Capitals. Now, the thing was, with the Caps, I thought they did really well, and I didn't even realize how well they did until I had to review every single team. But looking at it now, it was solid. You got Ivan Miroschnichenko at number 20, which, here's the thing. If he gets back to health and he is able to recover from cancer, then I think Ivan Miroschnichenko could be really interesting. Top 10 in terms of talent, in terms of skill, in terms of game-breaking ability, but he's just a guy that needs to put it all together. We'll see how he develops, but I think that could be a really interesting boom or bust prospect. On the other side of things, you got Ryan Chesley, who I think is one of the more refined prospects of this draft, although definitely needs some work still in terms of that risky decision-making that I think he can still fall into. At the same time, I do think he's a solid skater, he's a good board battler, and he's a guy that defensively is just an efficient player and around the board is able to get possession back and start transitions decently. Just going to be a solid, potentially fourth defenseman that you like to have on your team. Other than that, I like the Alexander Suzdaliv pick. The Ludwig Persson pick is interesting. Another player that I added as a first rounder coming into this year. I still think has talent and has skill, but again, needs to put that all together in a consistent package. And overall, for the Caps, it was just a draft that they had some really solid picks, some picks that should have gone higher, and that just combines into one of the best drafts the Caps have had in a long time. But now let's go on to the first team inside the top 10. And next up, I have the Vancouver Canucks. Another team like the Caps that I just came away with thinking, wow, they just did a solid job in this draft. It all started with Jonathan Lekkerimaki at 15th overall, which to me is a perfect fit. Now, would have I preferred Noah Ostlund? Maybe, but I can see where the Canucks are coming from with the Lekkerimaki pick. Just one of the best raw goal scorers of this draft. His shot is electric, and his positioning with his shooting can also be so deceiving and knock defenders off their edges. And to me, with Lekkerimaki, if you can improve some of the pace, if you can get a lot more bulk on him, this is a guy that could be a solid, high-octane, goal-scoring winger, and I just like that pick and that upside at 15th. Then you got an 80th, of course, the Canucks selecting Elias Pettersson. I didn't expect Elias Pettersson to actually be drafted by the Canucks, but here we are. And in terms of the I'm pretty sure 2003 born, if it's 2004, let me know. But whatever it is, I think with Elias Pettersson, there is just a really good, really refined defensive game there. To me, he doesn't take too many risks, but he doesn't really need to. His skating is good enough where he can get around bigger forecheckers, he can get around big pressure and be able to make tight passes, tight plays in chaos. And to me, he's a guy that, although you won't see much of when he is on the ice, I think that's just a testament to how good and how efficient he is defensively. And at 80, I think that's a fantastic pick to make. I also like the Damon Gardner pick. He was a guy that also rose a lot for me in the second half. Although I wouldn't pick him in like the first 2 rounds or anything. At 112 overall, I really like that high upside pick. Also, Ty Young is an interesting one as a goalie coming out of the CHL. So we'll see what happens with the Canucks draft picks. But overall, especially in the first 5 rounds, I really did like what they did. Now let's go on to the number 9 pick. And again, this is really important if you guys are skipping to this spot, whatever it might be. But I'm not ranking these teams based off the trades they did or by the acquisitions they made. Some of the trades are factored in, but about the actual picks they made, that is what matters most, and that is why at number 9 I have the Chicago Blackhawks. If we are taking into account the Alex DeBrincat trade, the Blackhawks draft goes like in the 20s. Like it's not even fair, but just with the picks that they made, to me, I still think they had a top 10 draft in terms of the talent they got out, disregarding the trades that they made. Kevin Korchinski at 7 is too high for me, but I can see why they go for it with that just brilliant transitional game with such a high octane, high offensive ceiling. There's a lot to love there, and if he develops more of a consistent defensive rushing game, to me, I think Korchinski could be a solid defender overall, but again, bring that offense that he really knows and loves. You also got, in my opinion, one of the better picks of the first round, Frank Nazar at 13th overall. Had him ranked 8th on my board, but that is the type of player that, if he booms, could be a just great face for that Blackhawks forward group. To me, brings so much intensity, so much of a fun offensive game. He's just fun to watch. He's fun to watch play along the boards. He's fun to watch getting pucks back in dirty areas and still being able to come out with possession and come out clean with his solid skating and just solid determination. Number 25 as well, you got Sam Rinzel, which is high for me, but I can see where they're going for. Kind of like Owen Pickering a little bit for me as well, where he's this bigger defenseman that does have some problems defensively, and I think with Rinzel, it's a lot more than Pickering. To me, his rush defense is awful. He can get blown by way too easily, but you have a solid playmaker here. You have a great passer. On the power play and offensively, I think Rinzel will be great, but again, we'll just see how far that weak defensive game takes him. In the second round, you got Ludwinski as 39, which I think is a solid middle-of-the-road bet to make. Ryan Green at 57 is another interesting one. Great passer. We'll see how that translates. Gavin Hayes at the 66 pick is another pretty high upside guy. Same thing with Samuel Savoie, and then you got Dominic James. You got Ian Thompson in that third round, and in my opinion, the Blackhawks went for a lot of picks that could pan out, but also have some pretty big risk to them, which is like how I usually like to how I like to draft these type of situations. Usually like how I like to see these type of picks. And for Chicago, considering this is the first year of them truly, I guess, going for this rebuild, there were worse picks that they could have made, and I think overall they did a solid job. Now going on to the 8th selection though, and I'm gonna go to the Minnesota Wild. To me, just almost every single pick was just solid and solid value. Liam Ogren at 19 just fits so well. I'm just imagining him with a player like Marco Rossi or Murat Kuzadinov that I'm just in love. Very mature, just a super smart and super consistent guy. Doesn't really blow you away by any amazing moves he might make, but he just makes smart plays, and he doesn't even need to be all too flashy. He's a guy that can just do so much in the neutral zone, set up plays efficiently, be good on transition, and just be a good overall forward that doesn't have many holes. At number 24, you got Danila Yurov, which is a big risk to make. We'll see if he's able to come over to North America and when that eventually might be. Didn't really get much of a sample size this year, but if he's in the KHL next year and gets some time on ice, we could see that pick look really solid. Hunter Heights is another interesting one for me. High upside, high talent, but also not a lot of projectability. A lot needs to change with his game and the way he makes decisions, and especially with that physical size before he's ready for the pro levels. But again, that consistency on offense is really interesting. Next up, going on to number 7, and let's go on to the Carolina Hurricanes. What a draft they had. And again, with lesser options, you got Gleb Trukasov 60, which in my opinion is a first-round prospect, especially if he comes over. You also got Alexander Perevalov, which at 71 I think is pretty solid value too. Simon Forsmark, I think in the 4th round is solid. Cruz Lucius in the 4th round is a little bit of a reach for me, but I do think there are some good offensive traits. And then Vladimir Grudinin, which is one of the best draft steals in the draft, in my opinion, at 156. One of the best mobility defensemen and skating defensemen of this draft. And although physically, there is a lot that needs to change and a lot that he needs to grow, at the same time, the fundamental skill he has and the great skating that he has just brings so much upside. To me, this Canes draft was amazing, but that's really to be expected with the Canes at this point. Next up, let's go on to the 6th spot and the New Jersey Devils. To me, this was just a good draft for the Devils in a lot of different ways. They went for high upside a lot of different times, with obviously the 2nd overall pick in Simon Nemec. In that 2nd overall pick in that situation, definitely see where the Devils are coming from. And in terms of puck possession, in terms of raw, talented transition upside, there could be so much that you unlock with Nemec. And you combine that with the Seamus Casey pick, who also, in my opinion, has so much potential on transitions with his playmaking and excellent vision, passing, and decision-making game. To me, there's a lot to love with Casey, but also some difficulty in the defensive zone, some parts where he does get outmanned, but at 46, that could again be another great addition in the possession defense the Devils are building. Tyler Brennan at 102, why not? It's a goalie in the 4th round. Daniel Orlov is solid. Charlie Luddy, 126th overall, is a favorite of mine, but just overall, a lot of big D prospects, not in terms of height, but just high profile guys being added. And in my opinion, this Devils defense looks so much better in the future for it. Luke Hughes, the Mets, Casey, just by themselves is going to make life so difficult for other teams. But now let's go on to the top 5. And again, I'm going to be a little bit more quick with this because we have gone through the winners and losers just a day ago. But at the 5th selection, I still have the New York Islanders. Love that pick in Odiolus. I like Finley at 78 and then Isaiah George at 98. Just building on with that defense. And to me, with Odiolus and George, those are two of the better defensive defensemen in the draft and can skate quite well too, which is a big reason why they're so high. Next up at number 4, I have the Montreal Canadiens. If I can find them, there they are. Even though there are some picks that I maybe would have done differently, at the same time, there were still some amazing bets here, and with how many prospects they stacked on, it's hard to not have them as a top 5 team. Juraj Slafkovsky at 1 can bring some big traits to the Habs, and Mashar at 26 is another high profile bet, which is in the list of long ones they have in this draft. With Mashar, he brings a lot of great skill, a lot of great finesse, and thinks the game on offense so well. Loves to create high danger chances. The big thing is just that physicality is really keeping him from a lot more, and if he's able to bulk up, that could be a really solid second line power play player. Owen Beck is a lower ceiling guy, but I do still like him a lot. That overall game to him, there's almost 0 holes with him, and even though he won't blow you away, he'll win faceoffs at a great rate. He'll be solid defensively. He'll pitch in every single area and just be a solid third line center of the future. And then you got Lane Hudson at 62, which in my opinion was one of the draft steals as well. Even though you can improve the skating a little bit, I think you can improve especially that back checking skating. At the same time, I still love what Lane Hudson could bring to the Canadiens when it comes to that high pace, when it comes to that high work ethic, and also that passing and playmaking game that he brings. He just makes other defensemen, other forwards just so, he makes the game so much easier for them, especially on transitions. And at 62, I love that pick for them. Vincent Rower, I think, is also a solid one there. I also like the Miguel Torigny pick in the 7th round. So overall, some really solid picks. Maybe some picks that are a little bit lesser ceiling, but also some amazing high-end bets. And I think for the Habs, they get a great mix of everything. Now going on to the 3rd selection, I'm going to go with the Buffalo Sabres. Some great picks here. Matthew Savoie, Ostlund, and Cooley. That's just firepower in the 1st round. I also like Victor Nuchev at 74 overall. Mats Lindgren at 106 overall is solid value. And I also like Jake Richard at 170 if I had to say anybody else. And Linus Sodin as well at 211 is great value too for what he could be. Overall for the Sabres, I loved how big they went into upside, and it really shows with their draft. Now going on to number 2, I'm going to go next up to the Winnipeg Jets. I just love their draft in general. Those top 4 picks I'm still in love with. McGrody at 14, Lambert at 30, Salomonsson at 55, Zilkin at 77. Just so much to love. And then you got solid forces like Zilkin who bring great defensive traits, and McGrody who, if he improves that skating, can be just a great overall middle 6 forward. And to me, there's so much to love with this Jets draft. But going on to the number 1 spot, let's go on to the Seattle Kraken, who in my opinion, just with their entire draft, had so many solid picks and so many solid value picks as well. Obviously, Shane Wright to me is maybe their best pick in terms of value at 4th overall. Him and Matty Beniers as the 1-2 punch center-wise is going to be fantastic, but do not underrate the Jagger Furcus pick at 35. That is some amazing high sky talent with his shooting selection, with his creativity in the offensive zone. This is a guy that can make plays out of nothing, and in my opinion, if he's able to bulk up, if he's able to get a lot more strong along the boards and not give up the puck nearly as much, this could be a dynamic offensive player. Yanni Nyman at 49 is another interesting pick. He's a guy that I think also needs some more development, but I'm really interested to see if he maybe fits into a 3rd-line role someday. Nicholas Kakko, a goalie, I'm not sure how that'll work out, but we'll see what happens. Then into 61, I really like the David Goyette pick. So much potential, so much talent in the offensive end. He's a guy that just loves to make simple plays, but also uses flash along the net and around the boards. Now, and then you have Ty Nelson at 68, which in my opinion is also a pretty big high upside pick, even though there is a lot that needs to change when it comes to his decision making and the way he thinks the game. At the same time, the talent is undeniable. He can skate well, he can pass well, he can make great decisions when he has the puck and when he is a little bit less in chaos. But to me, he is a definite project. You also got other picks like potentially Tucker Robertson could work out. Barrett Hall is an interesting one at 164. But just overall, in my opinion, so much about this draft fixed so many problems for the Kraken's future, and especially that forward group. You had Wright, Furcus, Nyman, and Goyette, and that makes the Kraken's prospect pool so much more efficient and just so much more impressive for the future. So I think for the Kraken, this was a draft they needed to have, and they had a pretty great one in 2022. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Comment down below, what do you guys agree and disagree with, and where would you rank your team among the 2022 draft teams? Do you think there should be higher? Do you think they should be lower? Let me know your thoughts down below. And of course, let us know all your thoughts about the draft down below too. Make sure you share this video with your friends. Get out there to any hockey fans you guys know online. Of course, click this card for my 2022 draft content wrapped up in one tiny bow in a playlist. And I will see you in the next one. Have a great day, y'all. Drink some water, and goodbye.